there's so much interesting stuff about the 1920s and 1930s that I really just wanted to write a book about that. And so that's what I did. And part of what's interesting here is the source material. So here in the Georgian party archives, there's really a remarkable amount of stuff, especially about the 1920s and 1930s. When you get into later periods, especially the late 1930s into 40s, 50s, the Stalin period, it becomes very, very boring, very sort of template, repetitive stuff. But in the 1920s, the 1930s, you've got all sorts of reports, denunciations, arguments, stuff going on that makes the period really interesting. The other source, and I should actually preface this by saying, as many of you probably know, one of the big problems of doing research about Abkhazia is, one, it's really hard to get there, and two, the archive in Abkhazia was burned, was destroyed during the conflict in 1992, so it simply doesn't exist. Much of what we have in the party archive here in Tbilisi are duplicates of documents that would have been there. Obviously some stuff has been lost, but in the Soviet period they made multiple copies, so a lot of it is here. The other major source has to do with the subtitle, which is, so the title is Clientism and Nationality in Early Soviet Fiefdom. The subtitle is The Trials of Nestor Vlachova. And Nestor Vlachova was the boss of Abkhazia in this period, in the 20s and 30s. I'd like to say he was the party boss, but he wasn't the party boss. He was the government boss. He was the head of the Council of Ministers. And we have his archive, his personal papers, which apparently, after Vlachova himself died, he came to Tbilisi. He was invited to meet Beria for lunch on Machabeli Street in various residences, and they had fish. And then Vlachova died that night. So be careful accepting lunch invitations from Beria. So he died in 1936. In 1937, the arrests began of his family, of all of his associates, and the terror. There was a big show trial. Apparently his wife buried the papers under the floorboards in their apartment. And then 20 years later, a relative came back from the Gulag, dug it up, and somehow between that time and now, it ended up at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, where it remains. So these are the personal papers of Nestor Vlachova, which are really quite a remarkable collection of documents. And they've actually been used quite a lot by a lot of other historians and writers. Stephen Cockett uses them a lot. They're box number 3 of the collection contains photographs. And there are a number of photographs from that collection, which I'm sure you've seen before. They're really famous. There's one of Beria holding Stalin's daughter on his knee. There's Beria and Stalin together, things like that. And they come from that collection. So what really allowed the book to come together was the fact that I could put together all that stuff that I was seeing in the party archive with the things that were put together, with the things that I could find in this personal archive of Vlachova. They don't make sense on their own, but put together, the story really comes together in a way that it wouldn't if you just had one or the other. And despite its academic title, it really is, I don't say it reads like an adventure novel, but in some way I think it's more exciting than it sounds, because in that period, in the 1920s up until the mid-1930s, when Vlachova was the boss of Abkhazia, you had a lot of stuff going on. And the main sort of argument about it is the way that the early Soviet government, in order to rule this huge, expansive territory, with a very few number of Bolsheviks, they needed to use personal connections. They relied on who they knew. And so that's informality, what we call clientelism, or patient-client relations. They had to recruit their local clients. In the periphery, they also decided that we are going to have a nationality policy. We are going to try to depoliticize nationalism by giving attributes of nation to all the different, or not all of them, but many of the different nationalities. That means though that you have to find local guys, mostly guys, few women, mostly men, who are going to be your local people on the ground. You have to recruit. If you're going to say you're going to make republics that are going to be called Georgian Republic, Abkhazian Republic, Azerbaijan, Republic of Azerbaijan, and so forth, you have to, they decided that they are going to have so-called titular representatives. So they're going to have the people in charge, the local elites are going to be Azeris and Azerbaijan, Georgians and Georgians, Armenian and Armenian. You have to find people from those nationalities who are going